Hello.
Hello.
Let me get things organized here. So, welcome everyone. And can everyone hear me okay?
I can hear very well.
Oh, good, good. All right, all the technology is working. It's amazing. Yay. So, let's see. So we have Graciella and we have Marshall and Carolina, GH. So, welcome to storytelling. I have some stories, of course, but I wondered if anyone else has a story they want to tell.
I have a poem.
Oh, cool. Let's hear it.
Okay. I'm driving, but let me pull over.
Okay.
At least the beginning of it is in my head, so I can say it. Oh, this is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm stuck the car, and it's called "I Am Not Needed There." I am not needed. There are enough scholars arguing both or all sides of everything. I always laugh when I hear about equal time, as though there are only two sides. There are thousands of sides to everything. I am not needed there. There are enough etymologists. There are others who can use the beautiful words like nosology, tautology, eschatology, exegesis, and empholoi, not to mention syzygy, even though only 5,000 people worldwide know what those words really mean. I'm not needed there.
Can you send me the link?
Wow.
It keeps going. It's
Oh,
by
keep going. Yeah.
It's by C.P. Estes.
Can you send me the link?
There are ever so many beautiful singers whose voices are sweet or clear or powerful. And though I love to heal in their voices playing on my bones, I am not needed there either. There are more than enough people busy stirring the pot, taking the high road, knowing all shortcuts, calling more cooks to supervise the broth, adding more coals to the fire. There are more than enough who spin evolutionary ideas, who add more to the heap, who fill everything that needs filling, and who are emptying all things that they believe are in dire need of emptying. There are enough rolling stones, I've noticed, enough birds in the bushes, though far fewer in hands. Yet there are enough of all of these. I am not needed there. But down at the back of the small house at dusk, leaning over the great stone sharpening wheel, my old broken shoes fitted to the rusty pedals, I can make my legs go forever. I press the steel blade of every dull knife, not hard against hard, but tender against the stone, just right, enough against this spinning wheel. I make fly everywhere in the night, showers of sparks, little fires that catch often enough and just right, on various dry old tears, old useless memories that have nothing to teach me. Not now just stacked as crisp papers in some attic under hairline soffits in the cornice of my heart. This sharpening wheel, and its fire sets ablaze whatever is needing warmth, and it burns away whatever is no longer needed. Here I have found my place. Here I am needed, at this great stone wheel that cannot turn by itself, but only by the bones and blood of the hands and the legs that can hold to it, hold to it, hold to it. working long into the night, tiring, resting, coming back once more. Fire. Give me more fire, again and again. The end.
Wow. That's really, really amazing. Thank you.
She wrote a nice poem there. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else have a story? Okay, well, I have stories. And I'm just trying to, I had to go out of Zoom to send an email to invite someone, and now I'm having trouble getting back into Zoom so I can see what I'm doing. So, all right. Well, so I've been taking this course on religion and gender. And one of the things we've been looking at is how different religions view women's periods, their menstruation. And so I've been looking for stories, traditional stories, that will help me to understand this. And I have to say that I have not found very many stories that and so I'm looking for help in finding more stories. But I thought I would tell a couple that I did find. And maybe we'll come upon more as time goes on. So so here's the first story. Now, the first story that I know is traditional because I found a lot of New Age stories, and it was really clear that they were New Age because I don't know, they were just kind of hokey. So but I found a Yupik story, and now Yupik has entirely new meaning to me now, having been in Kodiak. And so Yupik is the southwestern part of the mainland of Alaska, whereas Alutiiq are the islands that go for, I don't know, probably more than 2,000 kilometers, like almost to Japan. But the language is virtually the same. The Alutiiq and the Yupik language is very, very similar, and their cultures are very, very similar. And so anyway, I found a story in a scientific paper from the Journal of Ethnology, and it was a special issue on blood mysteries beyond menstruation as pollution. This is a paper called "A Woman's Vapor: Yupik Bodily Powers in Southwest Alaska" by Phyllis Morrow, who's at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And when we were in Kodiak, Alaska, we discovered that the University of Alaska Fairbanks has amazing indigenous studies programs. It's very rich in this whole area. So here's how the story goes. So in Yupik territory, there are these half human, half animal beings called Ircinerate. And in the story, they're hosting a ceremony. And they have explicitly forbidden the attendance of oglinnerate, which means those who are starting to bleed. And a young boy is getting ready to go to the ceremony. And his grandmother tells him to accept and bring home all the gifts that the Ircinerate offer him, even if they appear to be nothing but grass and weeds. So he heads off to the ceremonies. And a girl who has just had her first period is overcome with curiosity. And I should mention that curiosity is a typical prelude to trouble in Yupik stories. Apparently, curiosity gets you in trouble. And so this girl goes to the hill where the Ircinerate are holding the ceremony. And she can see into the hillside, which is magically open. And people are laughing and dancing inside, but she is unable to climb the riverbank to get there. So she keeps sliding back down the hillside all night long. And she eventually wears out the knees of her thigh-high skin boots. The boy, on the other hand, has a wonderful time. And unlike all of the other guests, does not discard these seemingly worthless plants that the Ircinerate distribute. And he and his wise grandmother are really happy when the refuse turns into valuable furs on his return home. So this is a story about Yupik women who are menstruating being forbidden from ceremony. And but the interesting thing about this article and this whole issue of ethnography is that it's about moving beyond menstruation as pollution and moving into blood mysteries. And so I'm hoping to learn more about that and to find more traditional stories as time goes on. But so far, that's the only story that I've found. And I just invite people to look for stories for me. So before we move on to other stories, I just wanted to share some of the conclusions of this particular author. She says that menstrual pollution as an ideology, with its accompanying behavioral strictures, is typically represented in the anthropological literature as rigid and repressive, and often as singling out women for social restrictions. She says that the ethnographic evidence presented here suggests that in practice, Yupik rules were based on a consistent ideology that applied to all categories of people and that resulted in the applications of specific restrictions depending on their varying states, meaning their health or illness, age, position as shamanic initiate, etc. She says that the overarching principle behind these rules is the promotion of awareness. Awareness was essential for maintaining right reciprocal relationships among people and the various entities in their world. Obedience to rules was represented as safe and wise, while disobedience would bring danger to individual and community. Further, although rules were restrictive and reinforced by constant repetition and social pressure, they were not compulsory. Rather, they were presented as teachings or exhortations. She says, here then is a case that only superficially appears to fit classic concepts of menstrual pollution. The Yupik ethnographic evidence suggests that in attempting to generalize cross-culturally, we must not assume that menstrual restrictions are understood or experienced as rigidly inhibiting, either in or of themselves or in the context of other ritual and social patterns. So that's really interesting to me because, you know, in this course that I've been taking, we've been learning about the extreme negativity of Christians, Islamics, and Jews toward menstruation. And what I've been gathering from exploration of exploration of indigenous people is that a much more positive view prevailed, and so I'm interested to find out, you know, more about this, and so if you guys can help me find more stories about this, I'd be really grateful. Let me just finish with what she has to say in conclusions, because I think it's really interesting. She says that pollution models of menstruation, which are the models of the religions of books from the Middle East, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, pollution models of menstruation have tended to extrapolate generalizations about the social structural ambiguity of women from the fact that menstrual blood may be posed as a dangerous substance. The Yupik data suggests questioning this equation as well. Even a substance said to be dangerous has many meanings. The symbolic power of menses in Yupik society is largely context-specific. It is parallel in a number of ways to the power of other bodily substances and emanations, such as urine, feces, and gaze. And its abhorrent qualities in themselves lend it to multiple and sometimes strategic uses for good. For example, healing or warding off attack, and often inadvertently for ill. For example, negatively affecting hunting luck or vision. So this power can be reduced by simple measures, such as bathing, yet another indication that the danger of menses is relative. There seems to be evidence in general that Yupik women were viewed as relatively equal partners with men, thus arguing against the idea that menstrual regulation suggests an ambiguous gender status. For Yupik, in fact, thinking about menstrual teachings and other rules pertaining to other physical and social states seems more prominently to index a general concern with awareness than gender. Almost done. Further, to the extent that other normative and routine bodily processes may be treated in ways symbolically parallel to menstruation, as they are with the Yupik, the regulation of a substance or emanation does not even necessarily imply regulation of the person as distinct from the person when in a particular state, still less the entire gender. Despite the catalog of menstrual rules known in Yupik society, for example, women were not the only ones singled out for bodily and corresponding social restrictions. It is thus a long and potentially fallacious leap from the observation that menstruating women are exhorted to obey rules to an assumption that the status of women is ambiguous in a given society. In a larger sense, this suggests that anthropologists should be cautious in postulating general cross-cultural parallels between the body physical and the body social. In this case, between the regulation of menses or menstruating women and the regulation of women per se. So, that's all of that. And I'd love to get some help in finding more stories because I don't have many.
Can I
And
say something?
yes, please.
Do they have to be Yupik? Because by
Oh,
coincidence,
no.
I was invited to a girl who was from Kodiak's house today, but I'm not going to go because I chickened out. But they can be from any traditional story. Okay, I'll
Yeah.
see if I can attract some stories.
Yeah, no. I'm really well. I got interested in this topic partly because in being a doctor, I tend to get interested into medical aspects of whatever is going on. So in our discussions about gender and religion, I sort of honed in on menstruation, and but actually I can talk a little bit about this because I spent some years as a helper to a traditional woman elder, and I would be the fireman doorkeeper for many of her all women ceremonies, and which was a marvelous experience. I had amazing conversations with invisibles around the fire, and while the women were inside the lodge, but it was not unusual for her to take women who were bleeding into the lodge for doctoring, and really I think in many ways she was a indigenous gynecologist, because she treated so many women, and at the same time I've also encountered a rigidity mostly among men, predominantly, in terms of how this is never done. So, and also, I've known a number of traditional elders who in specific cases when they perceived that the need for healing was greater than the danger of contamination or whatever we would call it, that they would bring women into ceremony and would have them sit on sage and proceed with doctrine. So, so I'm suspect that some of the negativity comes from Christianization of indigenous country. So anyway, mostly we just tell stories here, but this is a time when I'm really looking for stories, and I'm looking for real stories and not New Age stories, because I found some of those, and they don't read in the same way that the indigenous stories do. So I'm suspicious of it. So another story I can tell. But first, let me just check in and see if anyone else wants to tell a story. Going once. All right. Well, I thought in keeping with this theme of women and their medicine, I thought I'd tell a Maine story that I've told before, but I don't think in this form. So this is a story about a young woman who is beloved by the plant people. So plants just reach out to her when she comes by, and they offer her their medicine, and they teach her how to use them. And she's very conversant with the plants, and very knowledgeable because of all of the teachings that she's received from the plants. And so one day she's out gathering plants. She's out gathering herbs and medicine, and the enemy appears. Now in Maine, back in the day, the enemy would have probably been people from the Iroquois Confederacy, because the Wabanaki, which are the tribes of Maine, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, New Hampshire, Vermont, were frequently at war with the Iroquois Confederacy. Though, of course, they also battled with the Massachusetts people. And sometimes even within the Confederacy, there was war between the Mi'kmaq and the Penobscot and the Passamaquoddy. So it's difficult to know who were the enemy, but in this story, the enemy comes from the West. So I'm going to assume that they were Six Nations people. And so the enemy appears. And so this young woman is out and about gathering plants, and she sees the enemy, and they're clearly preparing to raid her village. And so she has a difficult choice. She can cry out and warn the village, but if she does, she will surely be captured. Or she can stay quiet and hide and let them attack the village and perhaps even overcome the village. So being steadfast and earnest and all of those positive, virtuous qualities, she immediately cries out and warns the village, and the guards snap to attention and prepare to do battle with the invaders. And to which point the invaders decide to call off the raid, because it's not so much fun when the people that you're raiding know that you're coming. And so their war chief tells them to grab this young woman as at least one trophy to take back to their village, to prove that their raid was not entirely useless or frivolous or pointless. And so they do. And they march, they grab her, and they begin marching west, back toward where they come from. And that evening, when they stop and set up camp, the war chief wants to torture this young woman a bit. He wants to teach her a lesson. And so he uses fire, and he burns her hands and fingers. And being who she is, she has herbs in her possessions that can heal those burns, and she applies them. And by the next morning, her hands are fine. And when the warriors notice that her hands are fine, they become afraid of her. And they say to the war chief, hey, look at this. I mean, she must have power. And he's like, power schmower, I can do what I want. And they're like, no, dude, you can't do what you want, because if you mess with her again, she might have the power to do something even greater. She might have the power to hurt us. And we're not going to follow you if you do that. We're going to go home without you. And you'll be on your own. So don't do it. And so the war chief reluctantly agreed, to do that. And so he did. He said, okay, fine. And they went for another day. But that evening, he kind of broke his promise, and he snuck off and with a few of his followers, and burned her hands again. And the next morning, they were healed. And when it came out what had happened, then his warriors became even more furious, and they're like, dude, no more chances. One more time and we're gone. We're out of here. He's like, okay, fine. We just won't do it. But he was really angry. And so they continued to march, and eventually, in however many days it took, they got back to their village. And they brought in this young woman as a captive. And in those days, if you had lost a child in a battle or to a disease, and a captive was brought in, you could claim the captive as a replacement child. And so there was an old man and woman who had lost a child in his adulthood. And so they stepped forward and they said, we'd like to claim this young woman as our replacement child. And the war chief now, he'd already had some words with the head chief, and they had decided that for the time being, he could not torture this young woman. But the possibility was kept open that someday he could. But for now, she would be treated like any other captive. And the rules said that they could claim her. And so they did. Well, being who she was, she spent a lot of time helping other people. And she spent a lot of time getting to know the herbs that were local to that area and reconnecting with the herbs that existed in her area as well. And so the plants warmed up to her, and the people loved her, and she was always helpful. And that was just amazing. So one day, she's out gathering herbs when the war chief appears. And she knows that he's going to do something mean, because he always does something mean. That's who he is. And so she has a marvelous root in her home territory. And it's a root that's shaped like a human being. And it's the one thing that she doesn't want him to destroy. So she swallows this root. And then he comes to her and he smashes her bag of herbs, and he stomps on them, and he throws them all over the place, and he tears them up, and he just has a big temper tantrum. And then he stomps off. And so she picks up things as best as she can. But at least he didn't destroy her most sacred memory of home, no matter how digested it becomes. It's still a memory of home that he couldn't access. So she goes home and life continues. But something is different. Her abdomen, her belly starts to grow. And she begins to feel something moving inside of her. And she begins to look pregnant to everyone else. And people are amazed because it's a small village. Everybody knows everybody else's business. And everybody knows that she's not sleeping with anyone. And they're like, wow, this is magic. And it's also known to be magic because the pregnancy proceeds faster than any typical pregnancy. So almost before you can say lickety split, she's ready to give birth. So much faster than usual. And the time comes and she does give birth to a handsome baby boy, a beautiful baby boy. And everyone is thrilled. Now, I don't know, maybe 4 hours after birth, this baby boy stands up. You don't see that every day. And begins talking. You definitely don't see that every day. And he says, Mom, hey, Mom, it's me, your baby. And she's like, what? You're not an ordinary baby. And he's like, no, I came from that root that you swallowed. I'm the chief of the plant people. And I let myself be born so as to deliver you from these captors, so as to help you find a way home. And I'm not really happy about the whole thing because I find being in a body so restrictive. I so much prefer to just be a spirit. But you are the one that the plants love. You are the one that the plants favor. So all of the plant people have come together to ask me to help rescue you. And much as I don't want to become embodied, I must on their behalf so that I can help you to go back to your family, which I will. And she's like, wow, what can you say when you're faced with something like this? And a few hours later, he says, all right, take me to your adopted parents. I wish to speak with them. And so they walk into the part of the dwelling where these people that adopted her lived. And there before their eyes is their newborn grandson walking and talking. And he says, hi, grandparents. As you can see, I'm not your average baby. I come from the spirit world. I am the chief of the plant people. And so I have come to help my mother escape. And this is how it's going to happen. I'm going to give anyone who could or would possibly go after her an illness that will keep them contained, that will prevent them from running after her. And they will beg my mercy eventually. And I don't know if I'll give it or not. We'll see. And so on it went. And she was instructed to prepare to run away. But the time to run away was when the women went out to gather firewood, to gather branches and kindling to light the fire. Because no one could imagine that she would abandon her baby to escape. That would just not happen in that part of the world. But the baby had already muchly reassured her that he would be fine, that he was growing so fast that by the time they saw each other again, he would look like an adult. And though she didn't really believe it, she accepted his exhortations to escape, lest she be killed, because it turned out that the war chief had made a deal with the head chief that after she gave birth, he could torture her and execute her. And no one knew that, of course, but that was what was in the air. And I'm sure that was what the chief of the plant people knew. So that next morning, she got up and left her baby with her adopted parents and went out with the other women to gather kindling. And at a certain point, when no one was looking, she just kept going. And now she had hid some supplies in a hollow log, and she quickly picked them up and kept on running. Now, it took a few hours for the war chief to figure out that she hadn't come back, because that type of behavior would have been unimaginable in those days. A mother would not abandon her newborn to escape to her familial home. But there she did. And he immediately called out and announced her escape and demanded a war party to go after her. And people came forward, men came forward to go after her in this war party. And almost immediately, they were all smitten with the worstest, most vicious diarrhea that anyone has ever imagined. This is the chief of the plant people at work, causing this horrible, vicious diarrhea in all of these people, all of these potential posse members. And they just felt so awful that they weren't going anywhere. They took over the sickness hut and just continued to get thinner and thinner and thinner and sicker and sicker and sicker and worser and worser and worser till they were barely shadows of their former selves. They were quite incapable of going after her. She didn't know that, so she ran each day as fast as she could and as far as she could. And she slept in hollow logs or caves in the evening. And she just prayed that she would see her family again. Now, this spirit's grandparents, well, they thought that maybe the warriors had learned their lesson. And they spoke to their grandson. And they said, "Grandson, would you come, and talk to these people and maybe allow them to get well, maybe forgive them." And because he loved his grandparents, he did that. He did so. And he came into the sickness hut where all these people were writhing in agony and all of these other things. And he said, "Look, guys," he said, "I gave you this illness." He said, "I can take it away, but only if you'll promise to never pursue my mother. She's the one the plants like, and I am from the plant nation. And so you will never pursue my mother, and you will always follow the rules when harvesting plants. You will never take the only plant, the tallest plant. the only female plant, you will always be respectful of the plants that you leave behind. And they all agreed except for the war chief. And the old woman convinced him by whispering in his ears what would happen to him if he didn't acquiesce and let the young people out of their contracts with him. So he did. And about the same time, this young woman broke through the forest and came out by a river, a mighty river, where her father was paddling up and down his canoe. "Father," she screamed, "Father, what made you come to this spot?" He said, oh, daughter, I'm so happy to see you. It was a dream. A dream told me that you would appear in this spot at the river and to be here." Well, so she made it back. She broke through the forest, and there was her father paddling his canoe, because he had a dream that she would appear that day, at that moment, at that place, as she did. And back at the village, the war chief acquiesced, and he begged the forgiveness of the chief of the plant people, who agreed, who acquiesced himself and forgave all the warriors. And immediately they were well. And so it goes, so it went. And there was a joyful homecoming. Everyone was thrilled that she was back and celebrated her as a heroine for saving the village and for having the perspicacity to make it home from the land of the enemy. And everyone was happy. Now, 2 weeks later, she was out gathering herbs when what should happen when she was approached by the most handsome of young men you could ever imagine. And he walked right up to her and said, "Hey, Mom." And she said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, I'm your son." He said, "I grow fast, spirits are like that." And he said, and it won't be long until I go back to spirit world. Because, quite honestly, I don't really enjoy being a physical being. I'm much happier being a spirit being. So I'm going to drop this body fairly soon and go back. But she said, "I've hardly gotten to know you." And he said, "Don't worry." He said, "I'll be speaking to you constantly. And we plant people will make a covenant with the human people that for every illness that exists among the humans, the plant people will have a cure. And that is our covenant with you." To which she agreed, and he promptly disappeared. So, that's the end of my story. Any thoughts or discussion?
I think I've heard the story before, but I hope that you keep telling it because it's a really nice story, and other people tell it too.
Yeah, I have told it before, and it is in one of my books, though I can't remember which one. But I do love the story. And I think it's relevant to what I've been studying because it's a story that shows the respect that people held toward women in traditional Native American society. That, that she was clearly seen as powerful and capable and beloved by the plant people. And this story explains the medicine, how all of the different plant medicines came to the people was through this young woman who the plant, she's called the one whom the plants liked. And she teaches everyone about all the medicines that come from the plant people, which is kind of cool, I think.
Makes me think of your neighbor Rachel.
Oh, yeah.
She tells me a lot about plants.
Yeah, we just saw her recently. She came and brought some things, and we hope to see more of her as the summer unfolds. Well, I suppose it's still the spring, though it was pretty close to freezing this morning and it snowed overnight.
We hope to walk our dogs together.
What?
We hope to walk our dogs together.
Oh, yes, we hope to walk our dogs together with Rachel soon. But it definitely snowed last night here in Maine. So it's still springtime, I guess. The latest snow in Maine, by the way, happened on July 4th in 1945, which I think must have something to do with the ending of the war. Though I must point out that last year was the hottest summer in history, which broke the record of the year before last, which was the hottest summer in history, which broke the record of the year before that, which was the hottest summer in history. So I won't be surprised if we have another hottest summer in history, thanks to climate change. So, anyone else with a story? Okay. Well, I can tell a short story to finish us off. Doesn't that sound like cows? That noise?
It does.
Yeah. It's coming from Marshall. So anyway, one of the things I wanted to talk about is this idea of implicit in a number of stories of sacred impregnation. That idea in the gatherer story of how she swallows the root that looks like a man and becomes pregnant. And there's an amazing series of stories in Lakota country about Stone Boy. And Stone Boy's mother inadvertently swallows a pebble, a very smooth, round pebble, the kind that the ants bring up from inside the earth. And that causes her to be pregnant, this pebble. And she gives birth to a baby who's entirely normal in every sense of the word, except that he's made of stone. And he goes around trying to save the world. He goes around battling evil spirits and saving the day and protecting the innocent. And he's really a marvelous character. But he emerges from one of these magical pregnancies. And so it seems like many cultures have these immaculate conceptions that sort of conceptions that don't involve human sexuality. So swallowing a pebble or swallowing an herb. And in the case of the Virgin Mary, doing whatever she did with that angel, which sort of seems quasi-sexual, I suppose.
You have no proof.
What did you say, Barbara?
You have no proof.
I can't hear you.
You have no proof.
Barbara says, I have no proof that anything happened between that angel and Mary. Well,
I said it was a virgin birth.
Barbara says, everyone says it was a virgin birth. Well, I've got my
Funny.
suspicions. You know, I always think of this notion of virgin in an Italian sense. You know, there's virgin olive oil and extra virgin olive oil and extra virgin olive oil. And, you know, it's kind of a relative concept, at least in Italy. Now, the one thing I learned in Italy is that when we were in Tuscany, wine was €1 per liter at the vineyard where it was produced, but olive oil was €2 per liter. So olive oil is more valuable than wine in Tuscany, at least at the source where it's produced. So, so maybe the place to end, to think about our next get together, is to think about these amazing women spirits that exist in indigenous cultures. In the Dene, among the Dene people, there's First Mother, and among the Lakota, there's the White Buffalo Calf Woman, and among the Wabanaki, in this part of the world, there's also First Woman or First Mother, and of course, the reason Mary is so popular is because she parallels the powerful women spirits of so many indigenous cultures. So the Virgin of Guadalupe has an immediate parallel among the indigenous people of that region of Mexico. And so we could think about, for next time maybe, telling stories about amazing and powerful indigenous women spirits like the ones that I'm talking about. And that could be really fun. So we're at the end, and I just want to invite anyone who wishes to say anything to go ahead and do so. Any other comments, anyone? That's Marshall. Marshall hasn't said anything,
Woo!
but Marshall has a herd of cows. Or something.
Thank you for the story.
Yeah, thank you, Graciella.
Maybe that's what this thing.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah. All right, well, this was fun, and we will convene again next month in the last Tuesday of May, and for more stories. And if you're here in Orono, join us for refreshments. If you're online, we cannot provide you with online refreshments because we haven't figured out Star Trek technology yet. But it is coming. It will happen. So that's all. And
Good night.
good night.